When your silence interrupts their entire emotional system. There's a moment every survivor reaches, not when they block him, not when they confront him, but when they finally stop responding internally. A moment where your nervous system no longer jumps at every message, every silence, every shift in his tone. And what most survivors don't realize is that this moment doesn't just change you, it destabilizes him. Because narcissists don't fall apart when you leave. They fall apart when you stop feeding them. A woman once said to me, "He didn't panic when I walked away. He panicked when I walked away emotionally." And that distinction is the heart of this entire dynamic. A narcissist doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing the access you once gave them to your emotional energy. Your attention was their fuel. Your confusion was their leverage. Your anxiety was their reassurance. Your reaction was their oxygen. When your reaction disappears, their internal system hits a kind of emotional blackout. They don't know how to regulate themselves. They don't know how to sit inside their own emptiness. They don't know how to function without an audience inside the relationship. Here's the truth. Narcissists don't need a partner. They need a witness. Someone who absorbs their moods, validates their illusions, and prevents their internal emptiness from surfacing. When you stop reacting, that emptiness surfaces. Your silence doesn't hurt them the way normal people feel hurt. Your silence destabilizes their emotional architecture. It interrupts the loop that keeps their ego inflated. It exposes something they spend their entire lives trying to avoid. The internal void they cannot fill alone. That's why they may respond with sudden love bombing, forced vulnerability, guilt-driven messages, anger disguised as confusion, attempts to recreate emotional chaos, or silence meant to punish you. None of this is about you. It's about restoring the emotional loop your silence disrupted. They don't want you back. They want the version of you that kept them emotionally alive. And here's the part survivors rarely hear. Your silence doesn't punish them. Your silence exposes them to themselves. The moment you stop reacting, the narcissist meets the one person they've avoided their entire life. Themselves. Your silence is not revenge. Your silence is revelation. Your silence is the moment. They lose emotional control because they have nothing left to attach to. And in the next part, I'll show you why narcissists experience your emotional detachment as a threat, not to the relationship, but to their identity. The narcissist interprets your detachment as an identity threat. When you stop reacting, something profound happens inside the narcissist, something far bigger than insecurity or frustration. Your silence creates an identity rupture. Narcissists don't see relationships the way healthy people do. They don't experience connection. They experience reflection. To them, you are not a partner. You are a mirror. A mirror that reflects admiration, attention, emotional responsiveness, availability, and, most importantly, their illusion of control. So what happens when the mirror stops responding? Their sense of self begins to collapse. A woman once told me, when I stopped trying to explain myself, he accused me of abandoning him. That wasn't abandonment. That was identity exposure. Narcissists feel real only when someone else reacts to them. Without reaction, they feel erased. Your silence doesn't just frustrate them. It disturbs their psychological equilibrium. Because narcissists survive through external regulation. You were the regulator of their mood. You were the stabilizer of their ego. You were the buffer between them and the emptiness they refuse to acknowledge. When you detach emotionally, you remove the scaffolding that holds their identity upright. Here's the truth, psychology won't always say out loud. Narcissists don't fear losing love. They fear losing the emotional resource that kept their self-image alive. That's why your silence hits deeper than any argument ever did. Arguments still involve energy. Explaining still means you care. Defending yourself still gives them power. Silence removes all of it. Silence tells them the mirror is gone. And without a mirror, the narcissist faces the one thing they cannot tolerate, the absence of validation. The emotional stillness forces them into contact with feelings they cannot process. Inadequacy, meaninglessness, boredom, abandonment, panic, internal emptiness, identity confusion. To a narcissist, these emotions feel like psychological death. So they scramble desperately to reattach to the only emotional regulator they know. This is why they may suddenly soften, apologize, reminisce about good moments, or act as if they've had an awakening. But it's not awakening. It's identity preservation. They need your emotional response to feel real again. Your silence doesn't threaten the relationship. It threatens the illusion of who they believe they are. And here is the part survivors rarely understand. You were never the one breaking the relationship. Your silence simply revealed that there was never a real relationship to break, only psychological dependency, disguised as love. In the next part, I'll explain the survival instinct that activates inside a narcissist when your emotional energy disappears, on why this triggers their most unpredictable behaviors. The narcissist's survival instinct activates when your energy disappears, when your emotional energy is no longer available to them. The narcissist doesn't simply feel annoyed or rejected, something much deeper is triggered. A primal psychological survival instinct switches on, and they enter a state of internal crisis that most survivors never get to see directly. What looks like anger, confusion, or sudden affection isn't emotional expression, it's emotional survival. A woman once shared, "The moment I pulled back, he started acting like he needed me more than ever. It felt fake, but also frightening." She wasn't imagining it. Narcissists don't respond to loss the way healthy people do. Instead of sadness, they feel destabilization. Instead of longing, they feel threat. Your absence disrupts the system they rely on to hold their identity together. Here's what actually happens inside them. 1. Their internal emptiness surfaces. Without your reaction, the narcissist cannot suppress the emotional void they spend their lives avoiding. That emptiness is unbearable for them. Your energy once covered it. Now it's exposed. 2. They lose emotional control. Narcissists regulate themselves through you, your empathy, your attention, your fear of losing them. When you disconnect, they lose access to that regulation. Their emotions start spinning. 3. Their ego becomes unstable. Their sense of superiority was built on your participation. Without your emotional responsiveness, their ego starts to deflate. And they panic, not because they miss you, but because their self-image is cracking. 4. They feel psychological starvation. Just as your body can crave something it's addicted to, the narcissist's psyche craves the emotional energy you used to supply. Your silence feels like deprivation, not distance. This is why they often return with intensity, sudden affection, forced vulnerability, apologies they don't mean, accusations, guilt-inducing messages, or provocative silence meant to hook you. They're not choosing these behaviors consciously. They're trying to stop the emotional collapse your detachment triggered. Here is the part almost no one understands. Your silence doesn't hurt their heart. Your silence starves their ego. A narcissist's emotional system works like this. If you react, they feel powerful. If you defend yourself, they feel significant. If you panic, they feel needed. If you stay silent, they feel irrelevant. And to them, irrelevance is intolerable. So their survival instinct doesn't drive them back to you, it drives them back to your energy. That's the distinction survivors must learn to see. Their return is not connection, it's retrieval. They are not coming back because they value the relationship. They are coming back because they cannot function without the emotional supply that once flowed through you. And the moment you understand this, the dynamic shifts, because the spell breaks not when the narcissist changes, but when you see the truth beneath their behavior. In the next part, I'll reveal the strategies narcissists use to pull you back into the cycle, the moment their survival instinct activates, and why each strategy is designed to target your nervous system, not your logic. The tactics they use to pull you back into the cycle. When a narcissist senses your emotional withdrawal, they don't reflect, change, or grow. They activate tactics both instinctive and rehearsed to pull you back into the emotional loop where they once felt in control. Each tactic is designed to target your nervous system, not your reasoning. This is why even the strongest, smartest, most self-aware people can get pulled back into the cycle. Narcissistic conditioning doesn't manipulate your thoughts. It manipulates your instincts. A woman once told me, "He knew exactly what to say to make my chest tighten again." That tightening isn't emotional weakness. It's a physiological trigger. Narcissists learn your emotional blueprint. What soothes you, what scares you, what guilt you carry, what wounds you hide, and they use that blueprint strategically. Here are the most common tactics they deploy when your silence threatens their control. 1. The soft return, faux vulnerability. Suddenly they appear gentle, reflective, even wounded. They say things like, "I've been thinking a lot. I miss what we had. I realize now what I did wrong. Nobody understands me the way you do." This isn't introspection, it's bait. They're not sharing vulnerability, they're imitating it. 2. The urgency hook, creating emotional pressure. Narcissists rely on artificial urgency to destabilize you. Messages like, "We need to talk now. I can't believe you're doing this. If you don't answer, you'll regret it." Urgency activates survival mode. Survival mode overrides logic. 3. The guilt loop, rewriting history. Suddenly, you're the selfish one. The cold one. The one who's throwing everything away. Statements like, "After everything I did for you, you never cared about us. I was trying. You just didn't see it." This isn't accountability. It's deflection. Guilt is one of their most effective tools because it targets your empathy, the very trait they depended on. 4. The trigger silence, weaponizing withdrawal. They disappear. Not because they've moved on, but because they know silence once terrified you. Their thinking goes, if silence worked before, maybe it will work again. They want you to chase the closure you never received. 5. The mirrored version of you becoming who you wanted. This one is the most dangerous. When a narcissist feels they're losing their grip, they may temporarily become the exact person you begged them to be. Attentive, gentle, emotionally available, affectionate, understanding. But it's not real. It's a performance designed to bring you back to the stage where they feel powerful. And here is the devastating psychological truth. They're not trying to rebuild the relationship. They're trying to restore the emotional access they lost. This is why survivors often say, "I went back because it felt like he finally got it." But what they were experiencing wasn't connection. It was strategy. A narcissist's tactics are not random. And the moment you see the pattern, the spell starts to break. In the next part, I'll show you why these tactics work so effectively on your nervous system and how to recognize the difference between emotional memory and actual desire. Why their tactics work on your nervous system, not your mind. One of the most painful parts of this experience is realizing that even when you know what the narcissist is doing, a part of you still feels pulled toward them. Survivors often say, "My mind understood everything, but my body reacted like I still belonged to him." This is the paradox that keeps people stuck, and it has nothing to do with intelligence or strength. A narcissist's tactics don't target your logic. They target your autonomic nervous system. The part of you that reacts before you think. A woman once shared, "I wasn't confused mentally. I was confused physically." That distinction matters more than anyone realizes. Narcissists condition your body to respond to patterns, tone changes, delayed replies, emotional withdrawal, sudden affection, unexpected intensity. These patterns bypass reasoning and activate attachment alarms, abandonment panic, emotional scanning, physiological anxiety. Your body learned to read them to survive. And what the body learns in survival, the mind can't simply unlearn overnight. Here's how their tactics hook you physiologically. 1. Unpredictability keeps your nervous system on alert. Your body becomes trained to anticipate emotional shifts. When they reappear, the old survival program activates instantly. Not because you want them, because your nervous system recognizes the pattern. 2. Intermittent reinforcement creates chemical dependency. The formula is simple. Pain gives relief gives pain gives relief. Each relief releases dopamine. Dopamine cements attachment. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the anticipation of relief. 3. Their silence triggers your abandonment circuitry. Before your conscious mind says, "This is manipulation," your body says, "We're in danger." That fear is biological, not romantic. 4. Their soft return triggers oxytocin release. Oxytocin bonds you to the person offering comfort, even if that person caused the harm. This is how trauma bond forms. It's not love. It's miswired safety. 5. Your nervous system mistakes intensity for intimacy. The emotional highs and lows create a feeling of depth, but depth built from chaos is not connection. And here is the most important truth you need to hear. Your body isn't responding because it wants him. Your body is responding because it remembers him. There is a difference. A life-changing difference. Healing begins when you stop interpreting your body's reactions as romantic signals and start recognizing them as survival echoes. Echoes fade. Echoes weaken. Echoes stop controlling you once you understand what they are. What you're feeling is not love. It's conditioned response. It doesn't mean you're stuck. It means your nervous system is learning to unwind the pattern. And in the next part, we'll explore the emotional moment when the Pattern finally starts to break the moment your nervous system begins responding to you, not to him. When your nervous system begins choosing you instead of the cycle, there comes a moment in every survivor's journey that feels subtle on the outside but seismic on the inside. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with confidence or relief. It arrives quietly through contradiction. You feel the pull toward him, but for the first time, another voice inside you whispers, "I don't want to feel this way anymore." That whisper is not weakness. That whisper is rewiring. A woman once wrote, "I still missed him, but I suddenly felt tired of returning to the same emotional place." That exhaustion wasn't depression. It was the first sign that her nervous system was beginning to detach from the cycle. Here's the truth: few survivors realize your nervous system can begin healing before your emotions catch up. What changes first is not the longing, but the response to the longing. Before, the longing felt urgent. Now, the longing feels familiar, not necessary. Before, silence felt threatening. Now, silence feels uncomfortable but survivable. Before, the cycle felt like home. Now, the cycle feels like a cage you accidentally learned to decorate. This shift is biological, not emotional, not moral, not intellectual. Your nervous system begins choosing regulation instead of chaos, neutrality instead of adrenaline, quiet instead of intensity, space instead of pursuit. You may not feel strong yet, but your nervous system has begun refusing to return to the place where it once believed survival depended on him. This is the moment survivors often describe as, "I felt less reactive. His messages didn't hit the same way. I didn't feel obligated to respond. The panic didn't activate." These are tiny victories, microscopic shifts, but they represent the nervous system learning that you are now the source of safety. This is where the bond begins to weaken. Not because he changed, not because the pain disappeared, but because your nervous system stopped interpreting him as the regulator of your emotional world. This shift terrifies narcissists, because once your nervous system no longer responds to them, their power collapses at the root. This is why they may escalate, guilt trip, or reappear with sudden intensity. They can feel the bond slipping, not intuitively, but behaviorally. They sense the system they built inside you is failing, and they try to re-trigger your old responses. But here's the quiet truth: they can't reverse. Once your nervous system begins choosing you, it never fully chooses them again. The pull may still appear, the memories may still surface, the thoughts may still wander, but the obedience to the cycle weakens. In the next part, we'll explore why this shift is often followed by a deep emotional emptiness, and why that emptiness is not regression, but the space where your identity finally begins to return. When the bond breaks, emptiness arrives, and it's not what you think. After your nervous system begins choosing you instead of the cycle, something unexpected happens, something that confuses almost every survivor. You expect relief, you expect clarity, you expect empowerment, but instead, emptiness arrives. A hollow, heavy, unfamiliar, quiet. And that quiet can feel more frightening than the chaos you left behind. A woman told me, "I thought breaking the bond would make me feel free. Instead, I felt like a part of me had disappeared." She wasn't wrong, but the part that disappeared wasn't her. It was the emotional role she carried inside the relationship. The role your nervous system inhabited, so deeply that losing it feels like losing identity. Here's the truth that almost no one tells you: emptiness is not a sign of missing him. Emptiness is the absence of the cycle your body was trained to survive. Your system adapted to constant emotional stimulation, tension, anticipation, anxiety, brief moments of relief. When that stimulation stops, your nervous system doesn't celebrate. It grieves, not because it wants him back, but because it lost the pattern it depended on. Think of it this way: if you lived next to a train that shook your walls every night, your body would adjust. When the train suddenly stops, the silence feels wrong. It feels like something is missing, even though what's missing is the thing that was hurting you. That's how emotional emptiness works. The quiet feels foreign because you were conditioned to exist inside chaos. This stage often brings numbness, disorientation, loss of motivation, emotional flatness, confusion about your identity, an urge to return, just to feel something again. But here is the critical truth: emptiness is not calling you back to him. Emptiness is calling you back to yourself. The quiet is not punishment. The quiet is detox. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your emotional baseline is resetting. Your internal world is learning to live without the constant demand to regulate someone else's moods. Emptiness appears when your system no longer has to survive. And survival has been your identity for so long that peace feels like absence. This is why survivors often say, "I feel like nothing. I feel blank. I don't feel myself yet." Because the version of you that existed inside the trauma bond has finally collapsed. And the real you hasn't fully returned yet. But this emptiness, this strange, unsettling quiet, is the beginning of emotional rebirth. It is the space where new identity forms. Not the identity he shaped in you, but the identity you will shape for yourself. In the next part, I'll show you how this emptiness slowly transforms into the first real sign of freedom, neutrality, and why neutrality is the emotional milestone narcissists cannot sabotage. When emptiness evolves into emotional neutrality, there is a moment in healing that almost no survivor recognizes while it's happening, not because it's insignificant, but because it's quiet, subtle, almost ordinary. After the emptiness fades, something else begins to take shape inside you. Not joy, not empowerment, not confidence, but neutrality. A woman once told me, "One morning I realized I hadn't thought about him yet. Not because I was avoiding it, but because my mind simply didn't go there." That moment wasn't strength. It wasn't victory. It was emotional neutrality. And neutrality is the first true sign that the trauma bond is dissolving at its core. Here's why. Neutrality is the opposite of reactivity, not the opposite of love. For so long, your nervous system reacted to him automatically: panic when he withdrew, relief when he reappeared, tension when he changed tone, anxiety when he went silent. Your body moved toward him or away from him without asking your permission. When that movement stops, the emotional gravity that kept you orbiting around him finally weakens. Neutrality begins with small, almost invisible shifts. His name no longer spikes your heart rate. His silence no longer feels like punishment. His messages don't create urgency. His social media activity stops mattering. Thoughts of him become passing clouds, not storms. Nothing dramatic happens. You simply stop reacting. And this lack of reaction is not emptiness, it is recalibration. Your nervous system is no longer tethered to his emotional patterns. It is tethering itself back to you. Neutrality doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels uneventful. And that's why many survivors overlook it. The trauma bond was built on intensity, highs and lows, chaos and calm, fear and relief. Neutrality lacks intensity. It lacks drama. It feels like nothing. But that nothing is the nervous system healing. Neutrality is peace, learning to exist without permission. And here is the part that surprises most survivors. Once neutrality takes root, the narcissist loses the ability to influence your inner world. They can still try to provoke you, to charm you, to guilt trip you, to test your boundaries, or to resurface out of nowhere, but the hook no longer lands. Your nervous system doesn't respond the way it used to. There is no adrenaline spike, no longing, no panic, no internal negotiation. What they say may register, but it no longer penetrates. Neutrality is emotional immunity. It doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you never hurt. It doesn't mean the memories disappear. It means the memories no longer command you. Neutrality is the doorway to freedom, the moment when your emotional world no longer orbits theirs. And in the next part, I'll show you how neutrality transforms into something even deeper and more liberating. The return of your identity, a version of you that existed long before they arrived, and one they never had the power to destroy. When your identity begins returning to you, there is a moment in healing that feels almost supernatural, not because anything dramatic happens, but because something finally shifts inside you in a way you cannot fully explain. After the chaos, after the withdrawal, after the emptiness, after the neutrality, something forgotten, something ancient, something yours begins to rise again. A woman once said, "It felt like waking up in a room I didn't remember building." That is what the return of identity feels like. Your nervous system spent months, maybe years, organizing itself around his moods, his reactions, his silence, his approval, his absence. Your emotional world shrank until it fit inside the space of what he needed you to be. That's why you felt exhausted. That's why you felt lost. That's why you felt unfamiliar to yourself. Trauma bond didn't just attach you to him, it pulled you away from you. So when neutrality arrives, something remarkable begins happening beneath the surface. Your nervous system finally has space to rediscover who you are when you're not surviving him. This is the quiet resurrection of identity. It begins with small, almost invisible awakenings. You laugh at something unexpectedly. You crave silence, not because you're numb, but because it feels peaceful. You remember hobbies you once loved. You notice your intuition getting louder. You stop analyzing your worth through someone else's eyes. These micro-moments are not random. They are signs of re-inhabiting your own life. Your nervous system no longer allocates energy for scanning danger, anticipating rejection, or monitoring his emotional climate. That freed energy begins flowing back into you, into creativity, curiosity, rest, self-awareness, confidence. Identity is not something you build. Identity is something that returns when survival ends. And here's the beautiful truth. You were never broken. You were disconnected. Your real self was never destroyed by him. It was simply buried under self-blame, emotional vigilance, fear of abandonment, learned helplessness, and the exhaustion of carrying the relationship alone. When those layers begin to fall away, the world inside you expands. You no longer ask, does he miss me? Why did he do this? Was it my fault? Could I have fixed it? You begin asking, what do I want? What feels peaceful to me? What do I value? What kind of love do I deserve? These are identity questions, not trauma questions. And something powerful happens when these questions rise. The emotional gravity he once had over you collapses. Not because you hate him, not because you're indifferent, but because you no longer orbit his story. You return to your own. Identity is the one thing a narcissist cannot steal permanently. And once it begins returning, the bond, even its ghost, cannot survive. In the next part, I'll bring everything together and show you how this entire process becomes the foundation of long-term freedom, and how to never be pulled back into a cycle like this again. Freedom begins when the story is no longer about him. There comes a point in your healing where something profound becomes clear. Not as a thought, but as an inner shift. You realize the journey was never about understanding him, decoding him, anticipating him, or protecting yourself from him. The real journey, the quiet and transformative one, was always leading you back to you. A woman once told me, one day I noticed that every thought I had about him felt like an old language. I no longer spoke. That is freedom. Not a dramatic break. Not a victorious moment. Freedom is when the emotional vocabulary of the past no longer matches the inner world you live in now. Freedom is the collapse of relevance. For so long, your energy was spent trying to be enough, trying to stay balanced, trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid emotional punishment, trying to fix something designed to stay broken. You weren't weak, you were devoted. You were loyal to the version of love you believed you deserved at the time. But when the trauma bond dissolves, something extraordinary happens. Your capacity for love returns to its rightful owner. You no longer chase closure. You no longer need answers. You no longer bargain with memories. You no longer look back hoping something will make sense. The story stops revolving around him, because your nervous system is no longer wired to his emotional gravity. This is the moment survivors describe as, I felt light. I finally exhaled. It wasn't that I didn't care, I just didn't belong there anymore. Healing isn't becoming stronger than him. Healing is becoming you again. Once your identity returns, you see everything clearly. He didn't love you, he depended on you. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you were conditioned. You didn't miss him, your nervous system missed relief. You didn't lose yourself, you paused yourself. And now, the version of you that paused is waking up. A narcissist cannot follow you into this part of your life. Not because you blocked them. Not because they can't reach you, but because your inner world is no longer accessible to them. They cannot manipulate a nervous system that no longer responds. They cannot reopen a wound that has closed. They cannot re-enter a story that no longer centers them. This is emotional sovereignty. This is freedom. This is the point of no return, not for the relationship, but for the version of you that once believed chaos was love. You survived the cycle. You dismantled the conditioning. You reclaimed your identity. And now you're stepping into the life that was waiting for you on the other side of him. If this chapter spoke to the part of you that carried the heaviest pieces of the past, stay with me. The next video in this series will take you deeper into the next stage of healing. Why narcissists try to come back when you finally move on, and why their return no longer controls you. You are no longer inside the cycle. You are no longer defined by the wound. You are entering a life where your story finally belongs to you.